My mother-in-law tried to steal my inherited beach house with fake documents, but she never knew I'm a lawyer, and when she sued me, I destroyed her in court, exposing all her lies she'll never forget. I'm 35 years old. I'm a lawyer, although almost no one in my in-law family knows this because I never mention it. And what happened with the beach house I inherited from my uncle about 2 years ago basically forced me to use all my legal skills against the most manipulative person I've ever met in my life, my mother-in-law, Linda. And look, I know everyone thinks their mother-in-law is difficult, but mine literally tried to steal a property from me using fake documents, a fake lawyer, and when that didn't work, legitimate lawsuits that made absolutely no sense. The thing is, I've been married to Rachel for 6 years, and she's incredible, like the best decision I ever made in my life, but her mother is a completely different story. When we met and started dating, Linda was always nice to me. I mean, that fake niceness that you realize later was just because she was evaluating you. You know what I mean? Like she was measuring whether I was good enough for her daughter, even though Rachel was already almost 30 years old and didn't need anyone's approval. But anyway, I played the game. I was polite, went to family dinners, smiled and nodded when Linda gave her opinions about absolutely everything, from politics to how Rachel should wear her hair. My uncle, my dad's brother, was a lonely guy who never married or had kids, lived in this small house near the beach, like an hour and something from where Rachel and I live, and like over 60 miles from where Linda lives. I used to visit him pretty often when I was a kid, and then as an adult, I'd go once in a while to spend the weekend, help him with repairs and stuff like that. It was a modest house, nothing fancy, like 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, open kitchen, connected to the living room. But it had that ocean view that made everything worthwhile. My uncle died 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and in his will he left me the house. It was a total surprise. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything, but apparently, he appreciated that I was one of the few family members who visited him regularly and didn't just show up when I needed something from him. The property wasn't worth a fortune. Like at that time, it was appraised at around $200,000 or so. But for me, it had enormous sentimental value, and also, having a beach house is something I never thought I'd have at my age. When I told Rachel about the inheritance, she was happy for me. I mean, genuinely happy. And we started planning how to use the house on weekends, maybe eventually renovate it a bit for when we had kids. The problem started when Linda found out. At first, she only made casual comments, like, "Oh, how nice that you inherited a house. You must be very excited." But then the questions became more specific and weird. Like, where exactly was it? How much would it be worth? If we were thinking of selling it, that she knew someone who was looking for properties near the beach. I answered vaguely, because something in my gut told me to keep the information limited. You know, that feeling that someone is fishing for information for some hidden reason. Rachel noticed my discomfort but didn't understand why. She told me her mom was just being curious, not to give it so much importance. The first few months after inheriting the house were quiet. I'd go every 2 or 3 weeks to check that everything was okay, do some minor fixes, clean, basically keep it in good condition. I hired Walter, a retired neighbor who lived 2 houses down, to keep an eye on it during the week and let me know if he saw anything weird. I paid him like $100 a month. It was a simple but effective arrangement. But then Linda's surprise visits started. The first time was like 6 months after I inherited the house. I arrived on a Saturday morning and found Linda's car parked outside. I thought maybe Rachel had told her we were going to be there and she wanted to visit us, although it seemed weird that she'd drive over an hour without warning. I went in and found her walking through the house, like exploring every corner, opening cabinets, measuring windows with a tape measure that who knows where she got from. She saw me and didn't even flinch, smiled at me and said, "Oh, Daniel, you're here." I was looking at the place. Rachel told me so much about it that I wanted to see it. But Rachel hadn't told her anything specific about the layout of the house or anything. I knew that because we had talked about maintaining some privacy about the property. I asked her how she had gotten in, and she said the door was open, which was a lie because I always double-checked that everything was locked. I didn't make a scene at that moment, just gave her a quick tour, listened to her comments about what I should change or improve, without me asking for her opinion, obviously. And after like half an hour of awkwardness, she left. I mentioned the incident to Rachel that night, and she dismissed it. Told me her mom probably just wanted to help, that she had always liked interior decoration and that kind of thing. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. I started being more careful with the keys, made sure only Rachel and I had copies, and asked Walter to be extra attentive. Like a month later, Walter called me on a Thursday afternoon. He told me he had seen a car he didn't recognize, parked in my driveway for several hours that day, and that he had seen a woman, who by his description was definitely Linda, going in and out of the house several times, carrying boxes and papers. I drove there immediately after work, like I arrived around 7 in the evening, and found the house exactly as I had left it, but there was something different. On the dining room table there were papers scattered around, like someone had been reviewing documents and had left in a hurry, and when I say documents, they were copies of the property deed, my uncle's will, appraisal reports, all kinds of paperwork related to the house. In the margins there were handwritten notes, things like, check if there are co-heirs, review will for vulnerabilities, consult about time limit to dispute inheritance. The notes were written in Linda's handwriting. I recognized it because I had seen her writing 1,000 times on birthday cards and shopping lists when we visited her house. That's when I realized this wasn't casual curiosity. This was Linda trying to find some way to get my property, or at least part of it. It made no legal sense, like she had absolutely no right to a property that my uncle had left to me. She didn't even know my uncle. But apparently that didn't matter in her mind. I took photos of all the documents and notes, saved them in a secure folder, and that's when I decided I needed to take more serious measures. I installed security cameras, like a complete system with 4 outdoor cameras and 2 indoor ones, all connected to my phone so I could see in real time what was happening at the property. I told Rachel what I had found, and finally she started to worry. Told me she would talk to her mother, but I asked her to wait, that I wanted to see how far Linda was willing to go before confronting her. I didn't have to wait long. Like 2 weeks later, the cameras caught Linda entering the house on a Tuesday afternoon. And when I say entering, I don't mean she forced a window or anything like that. She had a key. She had made a copy somehow, probably from Rachel's key at some point when we visited. I saw her on the cameras walking through the house as if it were hers, taking more photos, measuring spaces, even opening the refrigerator and checking what was inside, which wasn't much because I didn't keep food there during the week. She stayed like an hour and a half. And before leaving, she left more papers on the table. That night, I reviewed the complete recordings and downloaded everything as evidence. The next day, I changed all the locks on the house, installed smart locks that could only be opened with a code, and updated Walter on the situation. Told him that if he saw Linda again to call me immediately and not to hesitate to call the police if she tried to enter after I changed the locks. I thought that with the new locks, the problem would be solved. Like she would realize that I knew what she was doing and would give up, but I completely underestimated her persistence and her disconnect from reality. Like 3 weeks after changing the locks, on a Saturday morning, Rachel and I were at the beach house spending the weekend when we heard someone knocking on the door aggressively. I opened, and there was Linda with a guy in a suit, like in his 40s, with a briefcase and everything. Linda smiled at me with that fake smile that already gave me chills and said, "Daniel, we need to talk about the property transfer." I just stood there like, what is this woman talking about? And the guy in the suit introduced himself as Greg, said he was a lawyer specializing in real estate, and that he represented Linda in the property transfer process. I told them there was no property transfer, that the house was legally mine by direct inheritance from my uncle, and that I had no idea what they were talking about. Greg pulled out a bunch of papers from his briefcase and started explaining that Linda had been making improvements and maintenance on the property, total lie, that she had contributed financially to various repairs, another lie, and that therefore she had the right to at least 50% of the property. I laughed, literally laughed in his face, because the audacity of trying this was comical. I asked Greg what law firm he represented. He gave me a name that sounded generic, like County Legal Associates, and I told him I found that interesting because I had never heard of that firm. Then that's when I dropped the bomb. I told them that I was also a lawyer, specializing in property and estate law, and that if they wanted to continue with this conversation, I needed to see Greg's license to practice law in this state. Linda's face changed immediately, like went from that confident smile to pure panic in 2 seconds. Greg started stuttering something about having left his license at the office, that he could send me the information by mail, and I told him, No, you show it to me now or I call the police for attempting fraud. Rachel was inside, listening to the whole conversation, and came out to see what was happening, and when she saw her mother there with this strange guy asking for half of my house, I think something finally clicked in her head. I told Greg he had exactly 30 seconds to get off my property before I called the authorities, and the guy basically ran to his car and left. Linda stayed there trying to justify herself, saying she was just trying to protect the family's interests, that the house should benefit everyone, that I was selfish for keeping it just for myself. Basically, the whole victim speech she had surely practiced. I told her to leave, and that if she set foot on my property again, without my explicit permission, I would sue her for trespassing, and that I also had evidence of all her unauthorized visits from the last few months, thanks to the security cameras. After that incident, I thought it would all finally be over, but Linda did what manipulative people do when they don't get what they want. She launched a massive family smear campaign. She started calling all family members, my parents, Rachel's parents who were divorced. Rachel's dad is a quiet guy who never got into drama. Aunts, uncles, cousins, literally anyone who had a phone number. She told them her version of the story, where I was the abusive villain who had physically threatened her, never happened. That I was manipulating Rachel to distance herself from her own mother. Rachel made her own decisions, thank you. That I was using my legal profession to intimidate her and steal money she had supposedly invested in the house. Zero evidence of this because it never happened. Some relatives believed her at first, or at least pretended to believe her to avoid drama, but my father-in-law, Diane, who is Linda's sister, and Michelle, who is Rachel's cousin, started asking questions, and when they heard my version with actual evidence, like the security recordings, the photos of the documents with her notes, the information about the fake lawyer, Linda's narrative started to fall apart. But Linda kept escalating the situation. Somehow, she found out where I worked. I think Rachel had mentioned it in some conversation before all this chaos, and apparently she started calling my office trying to cause problems. My secretary told me that a woman identifying herself as my mother-in-law had called 3 times in 1 week, asking to speak with my superiors about my unprofessional behavior and abuse of power. My bosses asked me what was going on, and I explained the situation to them, showed them the evidence, and they basically told their assistant to block Linda's number, and that if she called again threatening or harassing, they would call the police. And here's the best part. Turns out Linda also worked at an insurance company doing I don't know exactly what, and apparently she used her work resources, like office computers and work time, to investigate my property, search for information about the value of the house, contact that fake lawyer. Her whole operation was done partially from her workplace. Someone from her office, I don't know who, reported this to Human Resources and they fired her. When I found out, I felt a mix of satisfaction and seriously, she went so far that she lost her job over this? I thought that losing her job would be the point where Linda would realize she had taken things too far and would back off. But no. Instead, she decided the next strategy would be actual legal action. I got served with papers mid-last year. Linda was suing me for unrecognized financial contributions to the property and was asking for monetary compensation of $70,000. The lawsuit alleged that she had paid for roof repairs, had bought construction materials, had hired cleaning services, had paid property taxes, basically a complete list of fictitious expenses. She attached receipts that were either forged or were from work done on her own house, trying to pass them off as if they were from my property, like she didn't even try to make the addresses match correctly. I had meticulous documentation of every penny I had spent on the beach house since I inherited it. Receipts from every hardware store, every contractor, every tax payment, all organized in folders by date and category, because that's how I am. I like to have things documented. I hired a lawyer, colleague of mine, who specializes in these types of disputes, although honestly I could have represented myself. But I wanted everything to be completely professional and without any possible conflict of interest. We prepared a devastating response to the lawsuit. We presented all my documentation proving that every expense had been covered by me. We included the security recordings showing her unauthorized entries, the documents with her handwritten notes about how to dispute my inheritance, testimony from Walter confirming that he never saw Linda do any work on the property, Basically, we built a case so solid that my lawyer told me he was surprised. I arrived with Rachel, with my lawyer, with all my evidence organized in 3 large folders. Linda arrived with an actual lawyer this time, a guy who looked miserable to be there because he surely knew his client had no case. The judge, a woman in her 60s who seemed to have no patience for nonsense, reviewed the documents that both parties presented. Linda tried to give her testimony about how she had supposedly contributed to the property, but when the judge asked her for concrete evidence, original receipts with correct addresses, proof of payment, anything verifiable, she couldn't present anything. I presented my 3 folders of documentation. The judge reviewed them for like 20 minutes while Linda and her lawyer waited in awkward silence, and then the judge looked up and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Mrs. Linda, I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case, and I find absolutely nothing to support your allegations. In fact, the evidence presented by Mr. Daniel demonstrates conclusively that you have been harassing, entering his property without authorization, and now you are attempting to use the judicial system to obtain financial benefits over a property to which you have no legal right whatsoever. I am dismissing this case completely, and I must warn you that if you file frivolous litigation in my court again, you will face consequences for abuse of legal process." Linda's face turned red, and I could see she was trying to keep herself from exploding right there in the courtroom. Her lawyer whispered something to her, probably telling her to stay quiet, and they left quickly after the hearing ended. Rachel and I left the courthouse and she was crying, not from sadness but like relief mixed with embarrassment that her own mother had gone so far. She told me she couldn't believe she had grown up with this person without really realizing who she was, and I told her that sometimes it's hard to see things when you're so close to them. That night, after the hearing, I received messages from Diane, Michelle, and even from Nana, who is like the matriarch of the family, Rachel's grandmother. Everyone basically saying they had heard what happened in court and that they could no longer support or defend Linda. Diane told me that Linda had tried to manipulate her into testifying in her favor with lies, and when Diane refused, Linda called her a traitor and stopped talking to her. Michelle shared stories with me from when they were younger about how Linda had manipulated family situations to make herself look like the victim, like a behavior pattern of decades that apparently everyone knew about but no one directly confronted. I thought, again, that this would be the end. I mean, you went to court, you lost, the judge basically called you a harasser, your own family is turning their backs on you. What else is left? But Linda had one last move. Like 2 months after the hearing, Walter called me in a panic on a Sunday morning. He told me he had seen Linda at my house early that morning, like at 6 in the morning, and that she had entered using who knows what method because the locks were smart and she couldn't just make another copy of a key. I checked the cameras and sure enough, there she was. She had forced a bathroom window that was smaller, and apparently thought the cameras wouldn't cover that angle. Spoiler, they did. The recordings showed her walking through the house with a notebook, writing notes, taking measurements, taking photos with her phone. And then, this is what left me completely stunned. She pulled out brochures from a renovation company and started sticking them on the dining room wall, like planning complete renovations, putting sticky notes with ideas about changing the kitchen, expanding the bathroom, converting a bedroom into an office. I called the police immediately. Drove to the house. I was like 20 minutes away that Sunday. I had left early to run an errand. And when I arrived, there were 2 patrol cars there. Linda was on the front porch arguing with the officers, saying she had the right to be there because she was co-owner of the house after a judge literally determined otherwise 2 months ago. The officers asked her for proof of ownership. She obviously couldn't show anything, and when I arrived and showed my deed, the officers told her she had 2 options: leave voluntarily or be arrested for trespassing. She looked at me with so much hatred, like if looks could kill I would have died right there, and spat something about how I would pay for ruining her family, that Rachel would eventually realize who I really was. The whole dramatic telenovela villain speech. She finally left. But the officers gave me an incident report and suggested I apply for a restraining order if she continued harassing me. Rachel was the one who finally put the nail in the coffin of this situation. After the break-in incident, she sent her mother a long message, like a page and a half of text, basically telling her that her behavior had crossed every imaginable boundary, that she had tried to steal from her husband, had lied to the whole family, had lost her job from obsessing over a property that never belonged to her, and that Rachel couldn't have a relationship with someone who showed so little respect for her marriage, and for basic boundaries of human decency. She told her she didn't want contact of any kind, that she had blocked her number, her social media, her emails, everything, and that she hoped Linda would seek professional help because she clearly needed to work on her control and manipulation issues. I read the message before Rachel sent it, not because she needed my permission, but because she wanted me to know what she was doing. I asked her if she was sure, and she said she had never been more sure of anything in her life. It's been like 8 months since then. Linda tried to contact Rachel through other people at first, sending messages through family members, trying to play the victim again, saying her daughter had abandoned her for a manipulative man, but no one was playing along anymore. Diane told me that Linda tried to organize a family meeting, like an intervention for Rachel to reconsider, but literally no one agreed to attend, except a distant aunt who didn't even know the situation well. Eventually, the contact attempts stopped. The beach house is now our true sanctuary. Rachel and I go every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes just to spend the day, sometimes the whole weekend. We renovated the kitchen last month, painted the bedrooms, installed new floors in the living room, all with our money and our decisions, without anyone's interference. Walter continues to be our favorite vigilant neighbor. Now we invite him to dinner when we're there, and we've become real friends. I'm not going to say everything is perfect or that there aren't difficult days. Rachel sometimes gets sad thinking about how her relationship with her mother used to be. Before all this exploded, she wonders if there were signs she should have seen before, if she could have done something different. I remind her that none of this was her fault, that she can't control her mother's decisions, and that establishing healthy boundaries, even though it hurts, is better than allowing someone to manipulate you and abuse your trust. We talk about maybe, eventually, years in the future, if Linda really changes and seeks help, considering some kind of limited contact, but we both know that will probably never happen because for someone to change, they have to acknowledge they have a problem, and Linda still sees herself as the victim of this story. The rest of Rachel's family is fine with us. Diane comes to visit us at the beach house every couple of months. Michelle, too. Nana calls us every week just to see how we are. It's weird how such a horrible situation ended up revealing who was really there for the right reasons and who was just going along out of family obligation. Last week we were at the house, it was a Friday afternoon, and Rachel was on the porch watching the sunset over the ocean. I sat next to her, and she asked me if I ever regretted inheriting the house, if I felt it had brought more problems than joys. I told her no, not, for a second, because this house represented something more than just property or money. It represented my uncle's gift, our space to build memories together, and it had also taught us both a lot about setting boundaries and defending ourselves from toxic people, no matter who they are. She leaned on my shoulder and said I was right, that it was worth every difficult moment to get to this point where we finally had peace. And that's enough for now, I guess.